All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Doug Curtin, and I'm the Director of Content here at Platform. I also host all of our webinars throughout our Back to School series. We've had an awesome chance to develop a lot of great conversations around different subject areas, different ideas like technology, and we're excited to be kicking off this webinar that's yoga specific and yoga focused. We're joined today by our yoga instructor, Lulu. Let Lulu introduce herself to start out before we dive into today's presentation. So Lulu, thanks for joining us. If you wouldn't mind giving a brief background of yourself, and we'll jump in from there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lulu. I am the yoga instructor here at Platform. I also teach yoga at Core Power. I am also a high school swim coach for varsity girls and boys.
Awesome. So Lulu has both a yoga experience as well as working with different students in different groups. Today, our focus, as we mentioned, is going to be taking a comprehensive look at yoga as a subject. PE definitely has a lot to cover, and yoga is one of the things that a lot of teachers are exploring, starting to cover, especially as we continue to evolve post-COVID and everything else like that. We'll talk about some of the physical and mental benefits of yoga, making the case for why it is such a vital fitness opportunity for students to get exposed to. As all PE teachers, we know we're worried a little bit about standard alignment and thinking about how we can connect those to standards. And we'll talk about that a bit as we navigate the presentation. And then we'll talk about some modifications and best practices, knowing that everybody's going to be coming to yoga with a few different experiences. So before we do that, as I mentioned, there's a lot to cover within yoga. It's within PE itself. So this is actually a slide we pulled from a different webinar, but it seemed to resonate with a lot of folks just in terms of knowing there are a lot of things and buckets and curriculum units that PE is often tasked to cover. A lot of times Lifetime Fitness is one of the ones that we'll use to describe what yoga could fall under. And that can be a lot of different things. So we talk about yoga, Pilates, bar, and all of these different types of subjects. And yoga, as Lulu's going to talk about today, can be incredibly diverse and challenging subject area, but there's a lot to consider as we navigate yoga within our curriculum. So with that, Lulu, before we dive into sort of the how, talk to us a little bit about why yoga. Talk us through some of those physical benefits, the mental benefits, and sort of what's out there in terms of yoga outside of high schools in sort of the fitness, space in general.
Absolutely. So there's so many benefits, as you mentioned, with yoga. So physically, you get to build good strength in your body. It helps with mobility, flexibility. And then also what's great is it promotes proper alignment in your body. So the type of yoga that I like to do, especially here at Platform, is focus on more alignment-based yoga. So functional yoga, finding your joints stacked on top of one another, and engaging through your muscles. The mental benefits is the breathing that comes with yoga. So we do a lot of breath to movement. We inhale for one movement, we exhale for another movement. That breathing, especially the closed mouth breathing, promotes, it stimulates the amygdala in the back of your brain, and that helps, the vagus nerve. And that is what kind of settles your body, settles your mind, and allows you to kind of calm your body down. What else am I missing? And outside of like being in a gym, if you wanted to take yoga, what's great about yoga is all you need is your body and your breath. If you want to add a mat, you can add a mat, but really all you need is your body and your breath. And outside of that, you can go to a yoga studio. There's all different kinds of types of yoga out there to explore, which is also pretty cool. Other than that, that's one thing that I just love about yoga is the accessibility of it.
Absolutely. Awesome. And as you mentioned, I think sometimes like we take for granted the physical benefits of it. We often look at yoga as this like really neat mental, way to bring calmness and everything else like that. But we'll get into it a little bit more. There are a lot of physical benefits that you mentioned that we don't always think about with yoga. We don't really think yoga and strength or yoga and like that stamina. Obviously we think balance and flexibility because we kind of picture some of those traditional yoga poses that we see, but there's a lot of those fitness components that live within that yoga umbrella that I think sometimes probably don't get enough credit.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So from there, let's talk a little bit about kind of why yoga is worth the time. If you were making an elevator pitch, you already talked about some of the physical benefits, the mental benefits, but talk us through sort of how you would maybe talk to a student or someone that's thinking, or even a teacher, why is yoga worth it? Is it something that I can really do as like my main source of fitness?
Absolutely. So here's how I would pitch it. Because yoga, there's so many different forms of yoga and so many different levels for yoga. You can make it accessible to anybody as long as they have a body and they are breathing. They can 100% do yoga, and you can make it as advanced. You can add on different layers to make it more advanced. And you can also bring it back down and add in modifications for somebody that might need those modifications a little bit more. And what's really cool about that is if you're adding in the modifications over time, watching them improve and build that strength for those certain poses is really cool to see. And it's really rewarding for the student as well to kind of see, oh, I needed to modify before, but now that I've practiced it a lot more, now I feel strong enough that maybe I can feel successful at the next level.
Sure.
So that's what's really cool about it.
Yeah. And I think touching on that part about student interest, I think a lot of times we used to think, hey, yoga is one of those things that like is only for a certain type of person, and it fits sort of that like yogi, like meditative type style yoga. But there's a lot more yoga out there, as you mentioned, in terms of making it accessible and capturing students' interest, not just for the kind of stereotypical, this is what yoga should look like or feel like, but there's benefits as well that we haven't touched on yet for athletes and for all different types of students to be able to kind of tap into. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of content available. So it's not one of those things that students are going to learn in school and then never be able to continue on after school. And that's one of the big things that stands out when we talk a lot of subjects. Like we hear about different types of units taught and say, when am I ever going to use this again? Yoga is one of those things I think just about everybody will definitely interact with outside of school. And that presents a really kind of impactful way of why it's worth the time. The last piece here that we mentioned is standard alignment. Everybody's always interested in that. We're actually going to spend the next few slides. What we did was basically develop kind of the comprehensive outline of how we can start to think about yoga within our classroom, but also tie it to some standards. So below each slide, you're going to notice just a few national standards that we've highlighted and outlined. This is not a comprehensive list in terms of all of the ones that are available within yoga, but I think it is helpful to see that yoga can certainly be connected to a lot of those state and national standards if you are looking to do that. But we'll use that as sort of a context within all of our slides. But for today, we'll talk about sort of the big bulk of all of the different things. So our first thing to talk about is just general competency. And Lulu, you're going to talk us through a little bit about what competency looks like from building from the ground up. What are those foundational elements that every student should hopefully learn? And how do you sort of take those categories and break it down even further?
So the biggest thing for me as an instructor that I like to bring to the content that we have here at Platform and that you can bring into your classroom is that students are able to find their proper alignment in each pose. So we have all different categories of poses. We've got standing poses, twisting poses, bouncing poses, all of the different types of categories that we have. The thing that they all have in common is you're finding your alignment, proper alignment, stacking your shoulders over hips, stacking knee over ankle. So building that strength and alignment. And it's going to feel a little bit different for a lot of kids that kind of might not have that body awareness. So kind of coming to this place of building that foundation is building their awareness of their body, where they are in each pose, and how to kind of dial it back or maybe intensify as they get stronger.
Sure. And we're going to look at some examples later, but maybe you could just use one example here. We'll use twisting. So twisting you have lined up here. Talk us through what that pose is and how you would maybe think about building the competency at the ground level and then growing. So what pose are we looking at right now? And where could you maybe modify to make it a little bit more accessible or make it a little bit more challenging based off of where a student's at?
So for twisting, this pose right here is called revolved crescent lunge. So you have one foot forward Your knee is at a 90-degree angle. In this picture right here, I have my back knee off of the mat, which is a slightly more advanced version. So to dial it back down, drop your knee down onto your mat. Think about squaring your hips forward. We want to think about squeezing our inner thighs together, and then finding your stacks, your shoulders on top of one another. That might look like hovering your elbows rather than having the connection from your elbow to your knee. As you want to add on, maybe you find that connection. Take the balance out of the pose, keep your knee on your mat. And when you feel strong enough that you're fully engaging in your obliques as you twist, then maybe you start to squeeze your hamstring up and lift your back knee off of the mat.
Sure. Awesome. And so these are sort of the 6 categories that you like to use: standing, twisting, balancing, spine, hips, and core. There's a lot to develop, as you mentioned, from the most basic poses all the way up to more advanced, complex poses within flows. Is there anything else that, for someone who might be a little bit more familiar with yoga or will do their own research, that we're missing here that we don't necessarily, label, but there are different things to consider?
For sure. I think probably one of the biggest ones that would jump out at people is inversions. So we haven't played around too much with inversions. Inversions is anytime your heart is below your, your head is below your heart. So technically a forward fold would be an inversion, right?
Yep.
Or a down dog. The classic inversions that people might think of is a handstand or a headstand or crow pose. Anytime that your heart is below and your feet are off the ground and you're balancing, arm balances also are a big one. And that's definitely for the more advanced yogi.
Sure. Awesome. Fantastic. So continuing on, we'll kind of take it a step further. You've mentioned, a lot of different words and terminology that comes with yoga. You talked a lot about finding body alignment, stacks, all sorts of different things. Looking here, as we start to move past just being competent in yoga, we also start to be able to kind of define sort of the language and terminology around it. So for here, talk us through some of the things that you'll often come across within yoga programs, and what might that feel like and look like in terms of thinking about, using that common language that they're probably going to see outside of, class time and platform yoga or any other type of yoga that they might be interacting with.
Yeah. So every class we're going to start pretty much, no matter where you go, if you're out in another studio or anything like that, we're going to start with an integration. That means we're getting kind of settled. We're bringing our awareness back to our bodies. We're kind of letting go of those outside noises, those outside factors that, might cause stress or anything that's distracting. In this moment, in this time that we do an integration, we're letting go of that. We're focusing on our breath. We're kind of settling down the body, settling down the mind. So we take a couple of minutes to do that. Let go of the distractions. We'll move into a sun A. So a sun salutation A is a pretty basic warm up, if you will, for yoga. Some places might call it a little something different, but for the most part, most studios will call it a sun salutation A. That's going to be your first flow for your class. So that's always going to be the same. It's 2 to 3 different poses, and it's always going to repeat. After that, after you start to warm up your body, we go into a sun B flow. And that's going to be with more movements that are a little bit more complex, a little bit harder. And that's just really starting to engage those key muscles that we talked about earlier in finding stacks, squeezing inner thighs, that stuff. So the sun B flow is set up as kind of the main part of your workout, if you will. And then, of course, every single class is going to have a shavasana at the end. And that's probably the hardest part of a yoga class. That's the time where you are lying down on your mat. Maybe you have your eyes closed. You're focused on your breath. You're letting go of the thoughts that don't serve you. You're just kind of taking a moment to relax and let go. Your ujjayi breath is also a very common thing in yoga classes. And that's just a type of breathing. So it's a breathing technique that we call ujjayi in Sanskrit, but it really just means it's closed mouth breathing. So that inhale through your nose and exhale back out through your nose. So you get that oceanic sound, press your tongue to the roof of your mouth, and that's what starts to settle your vagus nerve.
Awesome. And that's a great example of some of the key terminology that's going to be used at a higher level in terms of labeling and starting to think things out. There's also, as you mentioned, starting to think about more specific terminology that gets associated with it as well. So this standard 2, H2L1, just to make a quick modification to what's written, is thinking about applying the terminology associated with exercise and participation in self-selected performance activities. So getting that terminology piece is another great way that we're starting to build those skills, not just being able to do it, but being able to talk about it, define it, and go from there. Moving on here, just to kind of tie it together and continuing to think about how this works within that standard-based approach. We won't spend too much time on this one, but there are, as Lulu mentioned, a lot of yoga lessons that Lulu has developed here at Platform to make available for students. We're going to preview a few of those in the next coming slides, but to give you a little bit of a layout of how that's structured, we'll basically use our Platform app, or you can use a projector, any way that you want to be able to deliver the workouts to students, the lessons, the yoga lessons to students, and broken down into 3 parts. There's an intro to yoga part 1, part 2, and an intermediate yoga, and we're always developing more. So talk us a little bit through, Lulu, how we take that kind of progression from part 1 to part 2, going from just pose lesson plans into starting to apply them to flows. For someone that's not familiar with yoga, what's the difference that you're doing there from just a pose breakdown to a flow breakdown?
So pose breakdown, we're just focusing on that one pose. We're just learning what that pose is. We're learning how to find our alignment in our bodies for that pose. And it's just the one pose. And as we go, yeah.
And Lulu, just take that a step further. Why did you decide, or why was kind of the approach to not throw it into a flow? Because I think oftentimes when you turn on yoga, you'll see just kind of like that flow, you're going from one thing to another. You almost took a step further back. What was your goal, or what's the goal of the program in terms of setting students up with that foundation?
The goal for that is foundation. So you're building a very strong foundation for yourself, for your body awareness. A lot of students, especially at, the middle school, high school age, there's not a whole ton of body awareness. They're growing a ton, growth spurts are happening. Body awareness is really tough. So taking it a step back is going to make them a lot more successful as we go forward. The thing that I am not a huge fan of when it comes to just jumping right into a flow is we say the names. It's a breath, it's a posture, and it's a cue. And when you don't really know where you're going, it's going to feel kind of stressful, there's a lot of anxiety. I don't really know how to move my body that way. I don't know where to go. I don't know what this means. So taking it a step back to just breaking down the pose, we're learning the name of the pose. We're learning how to breathe in that pose, and we're learning what our body feels like in that pose. So taking time to practice that. We're yoga practice, not yoga perfect. And as we move forward, after you start to build that good foundation and you feel confident in each pose, and you can hear warrior 2, oh, and I can hop right into it. That's when we start to add on, where we introduce a couple of new poses in each lesson. We continue to break them down, but then we also practice the flow part, because that's another thing that can feel really difficult to students, is that flow of one breath to one motion. I'm moving each time I'm breathing. So that takes practice too. So our intro to yoga part 2, we get to kind of practice what it feels like to flow.
Sure. Awesome. And I think that's a great breakdown and really helps paint the picture of, thinking about it as in terms of any other program, right? Often, we break down the basics, whatever it may be, whether it's fitness, whether it's games, whether it's any type of, exercise option. We start really basic because we know we have to grow. I think sometimes in yoga, we skip over that step and we go right to the thing that we find on YouTube or social media. And we want to help students be able to know, hey, before we get to those points, let's set up that foundation in a really strong way. Awesome. And because of that, we talked a little bit already, and you already walked us through this example in terms of kind of thinking about the revolved crescent and thinking about the different pieces that come with that. So what we'll do actually right now is actually take a look at an example. This is from that intro to yoga program. And that's part one, where we're breaking down this movement, and we'll talk about it a little after.
Next, we're going to be moving on to a revolved crescent lunge. So we're going to find the same legs that we did in our crescent lunge. So starting with our right foot back, our left foot forward, drop your back knee down onto your mat. Square your hips towards the top of your mat. Bring your hands to your chest. From here, you're going to inhale and shift open by squeezing your shoulder blades together, stacking your elbows on top of one another. Take a moment, check down, re-square your hips towards the top, and then press into your palms to bring your gaze over your shoulders. This is crescent lunge. If this feels comfortable, go ahead and tuck your toes. Lift your back knee off your mat, hold here. Squeeze your right glute, lifting your heel just a little bit higher, and really press into your thumbs to lift your chest. Bring your gaze over to your shoulder, bringing the
All right, awesome. So we can pause there. That's a great kind of place to just continue to break this down. Lulu, one of the things that, we get questions a lot from is you just sort of helped navigate in the video students being able to kind of find the right pose for them. As a teacher, you mentioned not every student's going to be totally body aware, and they're going to maybe think that they're where they need to be, but they might not really be there yet. So what would be some ways that you would suggest as a teacher navigating this, helping students sort of find the right position for them? How would you go about a classroom full of students trying this for the first time and help kind of make sure that they've checked in with some of those kind of more one-to-one type cues?
Yeah, so a lot of the cues that I would use, that I do use in my classes and that I like to use with students especially, is finding really tactile things, right? So we're going to do this so that we can feel this, right? So we want to squeeze our inner thighs to help us square our hips forward. Or you want to pull your belly button to your spine to engage through your core. You want to think about explaining it in a way that I'm not really using too much terminology that's going to be out of their realm of what they know in their own body.
Sure.
So making it accessible in that sense, and having them understand, like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I should feel something like this in a sense.
Awesome. And I think a lot of times we assume that students are going to sort of know when to stop and start and be able to modify, but it takes a little bit of like cueing and adjusting as we do go through those steps to be able for them to recognize, hey, here's the best place for me. And I know that I can sort of tweak up or down if necessary.
Yeah, definitely starting, for this pose, as an example, starting at that first level, knee on the ground, maybe even just hovering the elbows over as an extra modification before just jumping right in. So let's feel successful at the first level before we move on to the next level. Feel comfortable in your body, feel like your body is working, but it's not overworking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where you also can then be able to say, we're just going to find this pose, and then we'll come back, reset, and then we'll find it again. So we only watched the first minute of this video, but what we're really able to do is start to think about, a few times over, finding the pose, resetting, breathing in, breathing out, and then continuing to find it on both sides so that we've set up sort of that foundation. And then when we do kind of get into the next segment of lessons as we progress over time, now, again, this isn't all happening in one class. This is happening over a series of classes. They're able to then kind of build into those next steps. From there, a lot of times we're trying to think about finding, now we're going to take sort of the other side of the coin is finding something that's going to be difficult, something that's going to challenge them and give them that experience that they know, like, all right, I'm getting a good work out of this. And that can be tough, right? Because we want to be able to find the right modification and challenge. We're now taking a look at one of our more advanced yoga programs. This is now after they've set up the foundation. We've been able to kind of go through all of the basics, but just because we've introduced all those things and practiced it, we might come back to this unit after a vacation or after anything else like that. We want to make sure that we still outline and develop those. So before we watch this video, talk to us about the chaturanga, Lulu, because I think it's probably one of the harder parts of yoga that we just assume most people are going to be able to do.
Yeah, chaturangas are super, super difficult, especially what I see students struggle with most is having proper alignment through their chaturanga. So a proper alignment for your chaturanga means your elbows are fully pinned in towards your ribs. It's almost like you're making a little shelf for yourself in your underneath your ribs. And then from there, keeping your core engaged, keeping that nice long line of energy through your spine. And then for an up dog, a lot of us like to drop our knees down to the mat or kind of extend the gaze all the way up and above, which in some types of yoga, that's okay. The type that I like to teach and that we like to teach here at Platform is functional yoga. So we're going to keep that proper alignment. So you want to keep your knees off your mat to protect your low back. You want to just gaze straight ahead so that you're not bringing any compression into your cervical spine.
Right.
And then it takes a lot of core strength from there to move into your down dog. So that's the full chaturanga. You're coming from a high plank, you're lowering down, pulling your elbows in, keep that nice alignment. Coming up into an up dog, you want to, again, just gaze ahead, no crunching of the cervical spine, protect your low back, then come back into a down dog. So it's a big 3-breath movement that can be actually pretty difficult if you're doing it properly.
Sure. All right, Lulu, give me a thumbs up just so I know that the sound comes through.
Before we get started, we're going to do a real quick overview of our chaturangas. So if it's been a little while, we have 2 different variations. The first one, if you're coming from a high plank, go ahead and drop your knees down onto your mat, shift your shoulders over your wrists, lower halfway down, be sure to pin your elbows in towards your ribs. Inhale, upward facing dog. Place the tops of your toes on your mat. Keep your knees lifted. Keep your gaze neutral right in front of you. Exhale, down dog, send your hips up and back. So that's the first variation of the chaturanga. The next one is from a high plank. Instead of dropping your knees down, shift yourself forward, lower halfway down. Inhale, upward facing dog. Exhale, downward facing dog. So those.
Awesome. So we'll pause that there. And then Lulu goes into continuing a full lesson. As you can see, that's going to be 30 minutes long and fully in depth and covering everything from start to finish of a good workout. So I think this is a great lesson example because it's our first lesson in our more advanced series, but we still want to make sure that even as we continue to progress, we don't lose sight of making yoga something accessible to everybody. Because even if they've done a full slate of introductory programming, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the strength or capacity yet to be doing chaturangas all the way through a program. And I think that helps to really emphasize to our students that we want them to be challenged, but it doesn't mean we want them not to be able to continue going on. So we've already shared a lot of best practices along the way, but Lulu, to wrap up today, before we open it up to questions and conversation, I think, there's a lot of different things you've touched on, but summarize for us sort of some of your experiences in teaching yoga, especially with middle school and high school students. What are some things that you think are just best practices for every teacher to sort of have in their toolbox?
Best practices for me when it comes to students at that middle school, high school age is coming back to the basics and finding that really good foundation, promoting a really good, strong foundation, keeping it basic, keeping it simple. Again, these kids are going through growth spurts left and right, and that body awareness is really, really hard at that time.
Sure.
So challenging them to find that is probably the best thing that a teacher can do.
Awesome. And another thing, and it's in the comment section right now from someone who's, shared some of their ideas, which is awesome, and appreciate, Margaret, you sharing some really cool insights. And one thing that I'm seeing from her, as she's mentioning, is trying some things and repeating them. I think often, with any skill, we know that repetition can go a really long way, and being not afraid to kind of continue to hammer home some of the basic patterns and find them in that position. So even as we do go into more advanced flows, we're repeating a lot of the same poses, just in different combinations, so that they can continue to solidify that and really get grounded in it. Lulu, on top of that, one of the things that, you mentioned a lot of the times is not everybody's going to become a quote unquote yogi overnight. Talk through a little bit of that in terms of how you put things into perspective for different types of students. How would you sell or pitch yoga to a student that's like, nope, not for me. I'm a football player. I'm a basketball player. I'm a softball player, not a yoga person. How do you put it into the context of different types of students that you run into?
For those types of students, yoga is not, it's a chance for you to just be a more well-rounded athlete, right? So we're going to also focus on your mobility, find different stretches. You're going to learn how to even do proper, what do you call them? Like those basic exercises, right? So those basic squats, lunges, push-ups, those are all incorporated in yoga. So when you get to practice that good foundation, you can take that, and then that's just going to enhance your practice. Yep. You can learn how to be more mobile. You can learn how to be more flexible, and that's going to enhance your game as a football player for your workouts. It's going to enhance everything. So it's really not just about the stigma that comes with yoga and thinking that we're going to be meditating and everything. Such a slow paced type of workout, but that almost makes it harder because you're holding a pose for just a little bit longer. You're keeping those muscles engaged rather than constantly pumping through an exercise, right? We're slowing it down. It's like you're moving through mud. You're going to be engaging in different muscles, and you're going to find out that maybe you aren't as in good of shape as you thought you were. And that's only going to enhance your other workouts as an athlete.
Sure. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we talk about is these are best practices, not only for students and being able to sort of help students navigate it, but part of that is also as a teacher. For some of us that are really comfortable teaching yoga, like yourself, Lulu, and some of the teachers that have joined us today, it's almost second nature. Whereas teaching weightlifting might be challenging, or vice versa. Hey, I'm really comfortable teaching fitness or weightlifting, but yoga, I'm not super comfortable with. We talked about some of the terminology. We talked about sort of getting to know some of the things. What would you suggest for a teacher that outside of just this webinar and talking about some of the structure of yoga will help them kind of get more comfortable teaching it to other students and helping students navigate yoga for the first time?
I actually really think that the newer you are to coming into teaching something, almost the better teacher you are. Right? Because it's not second nature to you. So if you're really focused on finding that proper alignment, I always come back to that because that's my biggest thing, is finding that accessibility of proper alignment for students. As long as you kind of have that awareness in your teaching practice as a coach or a gym teacher, using that to kind of help explain different poses and doing it in your own body. Think about how your body feels and then try to articulate that to a student and what you might feel in your body, and see if they can try to feel the same things, even if it looks different, but articulating it in a way that they can kind of experience it in their own bodies as well. But again, I think that if you are not as well versed in it, it's almost better to teach it that way, because it's not like second nature to you. You're not like, oh, well, I already feel this in my body. So why don't you feel it in your body?
Right. Exactly. So being able to maybe even just practice it yourself, go through a couple lessons, feel it out, see what it feels like, get outside of your own comfort zone. I know I did when we started to do these lessons, try a few out and start to like develop my own yoga experience, so that when we're working with different students, we have that terminology, we have that language, and it's shared, between students and teachers to all be on the same page and thinking about what's going to connect with them and really help them to find the proper body position, body alignment, as you said, within different poses, standing, twisting, spine, hips, etc. So awesome stuff. A lot of great content to unpack, and we only were just scratching the surface. So we're happy to answer questions at this time. If people have questions or comments that they want to take a closer look at anything, we want to make this as interactive as possible for the folks joining us live. And of course, if you're watching this recording, please feel free to reach out to us via email. We're happy to answer more specific questions about our approach on yoga or anything Lulu might be able to help. I'm always happy to kick it over to her so she can weigh in with her yoga expertise. Any questions that folks have about teaching yoga in class, different types of yoga we haven't covered that, you'd be interested in chatting about? Any types of questions, we're happy to answer them at this time. All right. One question, Lulu, that just can come through a lot, and we have emails of people asking questions before the webinar as well that I can grab from. One of the big questions that often comes up is sort of the time frame of things. What's a typical yoga class time frame, and what would you suggest for middle and high school students that are trying it out for the first time?
I would say a good time frame for that age group is probably between 25 and 30 minutes. It's a good enough time so that you can practice your integration. You get to combine all those components. You have your integration where you give them enough time to kind of settle in, bring their awareness to where they are in that moment. It's enough time to do a sun salutation, a flow, just kind of warming up the body and moving and breathing, kind of getting used to that, checking back in. And it's enough, again, that breath to movement, that muscle engagement, building that endurance. And it leaves enough time for a little shavasana, which is always everybody's favorite. So you can make each class kind of specific however you need. And when you get outside of the classroom, you can see classes that range from 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, 75 minutes, 2 hours. It just depends on where you go, which studio you go to, but each class is going to be set up in that type of way. It's just each part might look a little longer or a little shorter.
Sure. And I think one of the things that's really nice, as you mentioned, is you can find different things out there. I think one of the best reasons why we are so excited by yoga and we love putting it into PE programming is that it is going to be something that students will have access to in a lot of different ways, via studios, classes, or they can just Google it and be able to find things on YouTube, whether it's yoga with Adrian or anything in between that allows them to sort of grab their own time. Like you said, all you need is your body and maybe just, someone taking you through a lesson. It could be 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It could be an hour if you want. It depends on, what you have time for and can carve out. So that's a great way to look at it. Awesome. Okay. Other questions that people might have. Okay, great. Lulu, another question here. When it comes to thinking about being able to sort of move through actual flows for the first time, how much of an emphasis do you put on breathing? Do you try to combine all of those different pieces, or do you separate them out to start?
I think we separated them out to start at first. I think the most important part is we're kind of just learning how to move our bodies from one pose to the next. The breathing is going to come in after. It might sound funny, but I think the breathing is slightly more advanced, right? So we want to practice moving, finding that good, strong, staying in alignment, movement from one pose to the next. So let's practice that first, and then we add in the breathing afterwards.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else from folks before we wrap up? And as we do wrap up, as a friendly reminder, we will send everybody a recording of this webinar as well as the slides to the webinar, so you can navigate some of the things that we included in terms of sample lessons, sample videos within the presentation. You actually have access to a full 30-minute lesson if you're interested in giving it a try yourself, like Lulu said, or exploring with your class. You can definitely use it. Lots of great comments along the way, and very much appreciate people joining us for this webinar. There's certainly a lot here within yoga. It could be an entire year's worth of curriculum if you really wanted it to be, or a smaller unit within a grade or anything else like that. So thanks so much, Lulu. Anything else in terms of putting your stamp on this in terms of why yoga or try yoga before we wrap up?
Yeah, I encourage all of you to try it out yourselves, just to see how it feels in your body before taking it to the classroom. It's such a wonderful way to kind of move without feeling like you're doing something super strenuous, but you're still moving your body, getting a great workout in as well. So
Sure.
It's really, you get everything in yoga.
Absolutely. And I think to kind of summarize that even more is being able to think about it from that programming and curriculum perspective. You can connect it to standards if that's what administrators are looking for you to do. You can connect it to students by putting it in their language and in their world. And as a teacher, you're able to kind of navigate those two different types of things. So I think it's an awesome opportunity to just add in another layer, expose kids to something new in PE and in your fitness centers and everything else like that. And I think as yoga is intended to be something that's accessible to everyone. And I've seen that a lot in terms of thinking about modifications. Yoga is such a wonderful opportunity to be able to be an inclusive place where all students can participate, not, intimidating or feeling like it's only meant for X type of student or Y type of student. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, is thinking about modifications and making it accessible to everybody, which Lulu, you do a fantastic job of doing. So very appreciative of you and your time as well. So with that, we will wrap up. For all of those who have attended this live, be on the lookout for an email in the next few minutes with a certificate of attendance. And then within the next couple of hours, we will get a full recording out to everyone so that you can have this to review, share with your colleagues, or anything else like that. As we do get into September, we're wishing everybody the best of luck as they kick off and continue their school years. We know there's a lot out there and a lot going on to continue to be juggling. So please feel free to reach out to us at Platform. I've included my personal email as well. If you need anything at all, we're more than happy to be a resource for all of our physical educators across the country. So we'll wrap up there. Thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next time.